Hey, and welcome to a new edition of In the District. Today we're sitting down with the Executive Director of the Muslim Community Network, Husein Yatabarry. We'll discuss his story, the history of the MCNNY, plus much more. I'm Brittany Skyler, and this program is brought to you from Bronxnet's Media and Technology Studios in the South Bronx. Husein, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Brittany. I appreciate it.
Of course. So, just to get to know you a little bit better, tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up becoming the executive director.
Yeah, I'm a native New Yorker, Bronx bred and raised, and honestly, my journey is like the journey of any other person that finds their passion in life. It was me searching for belonging. I think growing up in the era of New York City's history of where Muslims were targeted people, I think I found myself like not knowing where I fit in specifically in my enclave in the South Bronx near 169 Sheridan Avenue. I know who I was, but outside of that, it was hard because post 9/11, there was a lot of vitriol and there was a lot of animus towards Muslims. My name happened to be Husein, so there were a lot of jokes about Saddam Hussein in school. So kind of like really honing in on my history and my story and my peoples, it was very difficult to have those conversations. So I fast forward a few years post-college, I become an educator in the public school system, and it was on me to make sure like there was a voice for those Muslim students that were in those classrooms that I was teaching in. And then I found myself venturing off the path of education into nonprofit work, and I find myself at Muslim Community Network, doing that really good work of bringing that belonging to Muslim communities across the city.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Something I found interesting is the fact that you just mentioned is that you were an educator before you were an executive director.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about how that influenced you. What did you learn from there that you now apply as an executive director?
Education is the foundation for all work. No matter whether you are an executive director or a CEO of a business, you have to onboard your staff and you have to educate your staff on the mission and vision and the ethos of your organization. You also have to educate in your communities on the services that you provide, how you can provide them, and like making sure like they're communicated with effectively. And those are all things that I took from the classroom and working in schools and implementing that same system of having that customer service mindset towards stakeholders. No longer like families and students at a school, but still families and students at a nonprofit. It's still that same system, but making sure you keep up that excellent level of service so that people can come back and people feel like there's a place that they belong. And we want MCN to be a place that all Muslim and immigrant families feel like they can belong. No matter where they come from and no matter how long they've been in New York, they're a New Yorker.
Yeah, so to get deeper into that, for those who may not know, tell us a little bit more about the Muslim Community Network and specifically its core mission.
Yeah, so Muslim Community Network is a nonprofit that was founded 23 years ago by a group of volunteers. Like I said, post 9/11, obviously it was a time of a blooming of a lot of nonprofit centers around working with Muslim communities in order to make sure they had the proper structures and the proper advocacy around them so they felt safe. And our mission is to redefine and shape that narrative around being Muslim in the United States through like 3 core pillars: community education, leadership development, and advocacy. And that advocacy piece has been really important. It's advocacy to city agencies, to state agencies, to elected officials, and beyond, to make sure that Muslim communities had the things that they deserved and needed, the support that they deserved and needed. Through the work of MCN and some other organizations, actually, January has been named Muslim American Heritage Month by Kathy Hochul in New York State.
That's amazing. And now tell me, from inception to now, how has the organization evolved over time?
The organization evolved obviously from a volunteer organization to a full-blown nonprofit, but I think the footprint of the nonprofit and all the different services it provided has become very vast. In our community education work, you have everything from immigration know your rights workshops to financial literacy for New Yorkers, English language programming. In our leadership development, we have civic engagement program for Muslim youth and older Muslim women that don't have formal education. And then our advocacy work is really steeped in hate crime prevention, but in twofold, in like doing workshops that do that conduct safety trainings for communities that have been impacted by hate crimes, but also doing diversity education for non-Muslim communities to learn more about Muslims. So like there's a greater sense of belonging in those communities. And then also legislative advocacy. So right now, I mean, that fight against Islamophobia and that fight against the xenophobia, we're doing a lot of immigration work and they kind of work in tandem. If you look at a lot of the immigration policy by the federal administration, a lot of it impacts predominantly African and Muslim nations. So we've been doing a lot of policy advocacy alongside New York Immigration Coalition to make sure that no immigrant feels like they're not protected, and specifically Muslim immigrants happen to be a lot of the target of the federal administration and like their overhanded tactics. You see the Somali immigrants, you hear to talk about Yemenis and Palestinians and West Africans. They were all majorly impacted by the rhetoric, but then also the policies that are being pushed. So we're here to make sure like we can combat that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And now you kind of mentioned some of them, but I really want to look down so I can speak about all of the different areas of programming that you have, which, as you mentioned, education, youth leadership, community service, hate crime prevention, case management, and the Muslim Women's Civic Empowerment Program. Tell us a little bit about some of these main programs and, you know, how you go about them, the implementation of them, and also the feedback from the attendees.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to any of our community education work, whether it's immigrants' rights workshop or financial literacy or ESOL programming, I think the biggest things happen to be that we do a needs assessment with the community about what their needs are. Mm-hmm. We don't come with a prescribed methodology of what a community necessarily needs to learn or be educated on. We get the input directly from community and like, this is what we need to be taught so that our programming can be personalized and tailored towards that community. I think the leadership development is a step up from there, where our Muslim Women Civic Engagement Program and our MCNNY program, you're taking groups and you're putting them into a core style program where like now they're learning all of these different workshops over a course of number of weeks and they're implementing community projects around those. So it's not just these one-off workshops anymore like in the community education, it's like you're implementing a series of workshops and actually conducting some community work and community benefit in order to like really develop that civic mindedness. And then our advocacy piece is making sure like now like we're creating leaders that have been trained. How do we get them more involved in like that direct day-to-day action and also connection and conversation with the elected officials that have the power to legislate and also provide funding for the initiatives that their community deserves.
Mm-hmm. And so tell me a little bit about the feedback from the people who participate in these programs. You know, what are they saying to, and even maybe some of the electeds that you've spoken with or advocated with, what's the feedback that you're hearing?
Community members are excited that linguistically we're able to provide culturally responsive programming to them. I think that's one of the biggest things is like that access has been missing in so many communities for so long. I think when you're able to come and provide programs in Wolof or Arabic or Bangla or Urdu, communities, their faces just like brighten up because like it's been so long where communities have had to struggle, you know, with a lack of proficiency in the English language and not be able to actually access all the services that they're entitled to or access to all the education that they deserve to receive. So making sure you have that culturally responsive education, I think that's been like the biggest glow that we've received. A big growth for us is like feedback-wise is powering up our case management services to provide more immigration legal services. I think that's been one of the biggest impacts like of the last year where community members are like, I'm scared to come into Manhattan into your offices or attend events that you have where there's places with like high security because I don't have my documentation. So making sure we're able to also provide those basic necessities, like making sure people have lawyers and they have their cases like under review so that they feel safe actually interacting with our programming, but interacting with all city services and city agencies. So I think we have that cultural responsive piece like really, really right, but it's making sure that people also feel protected whenever they interact with our programs and there's no outside factors that can kind of take them out the mood of engaging with us. Yeah,
that's such a great piece that you just mentioned, you know, take them out from interacting with us. And, you know, at the top of the interview, you also mentioned that in a post 9/11 world, there's a very harmful rhetoric around the Muslim community. And so can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the common myths or misconceptions about the community here in New York City that you think is important to address?
Yeah, I think many people believe like there's like this new push of this Muslims coming in. Muslims are just here in New York. New York City has 1 million Muslims. So I think when you look at that and you look at New York City's population of about 8 million, you kind of like realize, oh, there's a whole lot of Muslims in the city, and that's because we don't always all look alike. I'm West African Muslim. I'm very African American presenting, and like I'm African American, and I'm a Muslim. And then you may see someone who's an Arab Muslim, a Southeast Asian Muslim. You may find, we had a staff member in the past that was a Mexican Muslim, and it's like that's not, the myth is that there's specific groups that are brown people and those are Muslims, and like it's so broad. Islam is practiced in almost every country on the planet. There's hundreds of languages that are associated with the religion of Islam. So it's everywhere. 25% of the world's population happens to be Muslim, 2 billion people. So I think when we have this one-size-fits-all mindset on who Muslims are, it's very dangerous, because then one action by an evil person or a bad person, then it gets like, let's paint all Muslims with this brush. And we don't do that for any other community on the planet. Well, America started doing it with immigrants, but we oftentimes don't do that with other groups. But it just seems like Muslims really get targeted with this brush. If one person does something, then that means it's everybody. But there's 2 billion Muslims on the planet, 1 million in New York. If that was the case, it would be lawlessness, and that's not the case. Muslims are your neighbors. They're your teachers in school. They're your pharmacist, they're your doctor, they're your Uber driver, they're delivering your food. They're an entertainer, they're your NBA player. Muslims hold so many different roles, and like a Muslim man happens to be your mayor. And I think all of these places that Muslims are getting to, and like people understanding like, oh, Kyrie Irving's a Muslim, or Jaylen Brown's a Muslim, I think it's helping to demystify that, oh, I think I may have gotten this perception of how Muslims look and their perception wrong. There's still a lot of forces out there trying to push these myths and trying to push these negative stereotypes. But I think Zohran Mamdani winning the mayorship in New York, I think it's showing that New Yorkers aren't fooled by that rhetoric that's out there. And I think, especially the younger generation, they've grown around other Muslim peers, and like in college and high school, and I think people are just like, no, what I'm seeing on that late night news, that's not the truth, because I have a friend that's Muslim and that's not the case.
That is such an important piece of information that you just shared, and really talking about your experience. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
With that, we are going to go to break. So when we return, we'll continue our conversation with the Executive Director of the Muslim Community Network, Husein Yatabarry. Stay tuned.
Sent from the future to save the past, heal the planet and make it last. We find solutions with knowledge light. Venture forth, echo leaders unite. Echo leaders, echo leaders.
Welcome back. You're watching a new edition of In the District with the Executive Director of the Muslim Community Network, Husein Yatabarry. So once again, thank you for joining us.
course.
Before our break, you shared a really important piece of information and really cleared up some of the myths and misconceptions surrounding the Muslim community here in New York City. Now, to jump back into our conversation, I would love to discuss, what here in the Bronx, the Muslim community, what makes it so unique when we talk about the Bronx in particular?
I think the Bronx has a vibrant Muslim community where you have like really distinct enclaves in different sections of the Bronx. So I grew up in the South Bronx in an enclave of West African Muslims from various different countries. My family's from the Gambia, but you have Gambians, Senegalese, Guineans, Ghanaians, all spread in different sections of the South Bronx. You happen to go to the North Bronx and you see like large Nigerian Muslim populations up there in the North Bronx, like near Norwood section. When you go to Parkchester, you'll find a huge, robust Bengali population, and like they have like some of the most decadent and greatest suites that's out there. You go a little bit south, you go to Morris Park, and like you're in Little Yemen. And I think people who like to say the Queens is the world's borough. I think it's really the Bronx. The Bronx is such vast communities. When it's Ramadan and it's Eid, I think you'll see all the vibrant outfits out in the street, and I think all Bronx residents know when it's Eid coming up, whether you celebrate it or not. Once you see the red, the blues, the greens, people know, oh, it's the Muslim holiday. And I think it's been such a journey for the Bronx. I remember growing up, it was really difficult being a young Muslim in the Bronx, but I think the Bronx has grown in so much understanding of the populations. You see halal meat markets and African markets and Southeast Asian stores on different corners, and you'll see different patrons. You'll see Latino patrons, you'll see African American patrons, you'll see white Bronxites enter and like buy certain things, because like I think we're all trading these cultural recipes and these cultural dishes, and you'll see people just entering different establishments and trying to interact with different communities, because that's what it's about. We're one Bronx, and like we all have a little different spices and flavors, and it's nice to try all the different spices and flavors from time to time. So I think that's been the real highlight of growing up in the Bronx, is that I got to also interact with other Muslims besides my own community. And I think growing up, I didn't know about all the different communities until I traveled to different spaces in the Bronx. So yeah, I would say those are some of the big things. When I look at also Muslims in the Bronx, I see they all have some of the same major issues, which I know government officials are trying to combat, which happens to be affordability. I think just like every other Bronxite, affordability happens to be an issue, especially for Muslims in the Bronx. Many of them coming from immigrant backgrounds, many people having low-wage jobs. Housing happens to be like one of the biggest issues that Muslims in the Bronx face, and also childcare. Childcare just happens to be very, very difficult, very unaffordable. So that's something at MCN we're actually helping families do, is to access the city's 3K and pre-K system, and also sign up and try to get childcare vouchers from the city.
You know, that's really interesting, because something that we've also seen with the new mayor, Zohran Mamdani, is his push for childcare and accessible childcare for all. So tell us a little bit about how exactly you're able to help families. You know, is it, again, maybe through classes, through programs? How do you help set them up with that system?
Yeah, so we do family intakes, and the state actually already provides billions of dollars to the city to have childcare. It's not childcare in the form that we think of childcare from infancy all the way through age 5. They have 3K and pre-K that's already through the New York City public school system. So I think a lot of families don't know about it and have not taken advantage of it. But immigrant families can also take advantage. So making sure that families are able to go through that application process, because that happens to be the most difficult part. It's not that there's not resources out there, it's the access to them. So sitting down with families and seeing what they're actually eligible for. Some families are eligible for Head Start and voucher system, which they can actually get younger kids into the childcare system that are not age 3. We've helped families that have 1-year-olds get into the childcare system and get vouchers. But it's understanding how to navigate the system with our case management team. They've been able to help hundreds of families up to this point. I believe up to like 400 families in the past year and a half get into the childcare system. But New York City has a New York City Childcare Enrollment Initiative, and that is something that we're currently trying to push. I think the new mayor is trying to expand that pool so like more kids are actually eligible for what's termed as free childcare.
Thank you once again. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
And I want to jump back up, because in the question before, you know, you were talking a little bit about the diversity in the Bronx, and I think it's also just a reflection of the melting pot that New York City and the
Yes.
Bronx is. I always say, you know, when you go to public school in New York City, specifically, I went to public school in the South Bronx, and as a Puerto Rican, I was exposed to so many different cultures. And, you know, you do start to learn a little bit about the different music and the different foods and all of that.
Yeah.
So once again, it's like that big, diverse community, which is really interesting. So in that, tell us a little bit about how do interfaith and cross-cultural partnerships factor into MCN's work, especially here in New York City?
I think it's a large part of the work. I think no community is able to advocate for itself without allies. I think in any fight that there has to be allies within that, and I think we've been able to come together with Christian communities, Hindu communities, Sikh communities, Catholic communities, Jewish communities, and I think people often think there's divisions on faith lines so that people cannot actually work together, and that just happens to not be true. There may be certain issues that different faith communities cannot agree on, but there are fundamental values that all New York-based nonprofits and faith-based nonprofits and parishes, we all want to make sure that New Yorkers feel safe, and we all come together when it comes on an interfaith level when it comes to the immigration advocacy fight. When it comes to also making sure there's not hate crimes against religious communities, we all also come together in that sense of making sure you make it issue-based, because when they say interfaith, I found interfaith partnerships to be fruitful and then some not so fruitful. When there's an actual vision and priorities set in line, you see a lot of interfaith activations really be rewarding and really show solidarity and a real mobilization that actually gets things done. When there isn't an aim and the aim is just to bring interfaith groups in a room, then it allows people to kind of start poking at the differences between communities. But when you have people really targeted on a mission and mindset, then you end up finding success. And I think MCN has been in interfaith groups where we've been able to find success because we've been really targeted with our approach as to what we're trying to achieve in those conversations and through those actions.
And so on a larger scale, what would you like your Muslim brothers and sisters to know about the impact about engaging with different communities, learning with and learning from?
Yeah, I think faith is one of many differences that we all share, but I think we all share inherent values of wanting our families to be secure, safe, and happy. And I think learning about other cultures and other groups and other religions, I think it just enhances that sense of safety your family is going to experience and feel. I think the more we all know about one another, it just makes for a more vibrant city. So I think for my community, I would like them to know a lot about other communities and share in those traditions as well. Just like I push for other communities to learn more about Muslims and our traditions, our faith, and what we experience, because it all adds to the vibrancy of our city and our borough.
Absolutely. And now speaking about Islam specifically, tell us a little bit about some of the dangers or the real world impacts of conflating Islam as a religion with political ideology for both the Muslim community and society as a whole.
Yeah, I think a lot of the political ideology that we see in pockets globally in different countries and different areas, I think a lot of it has been associated with the religion of Islam. When none of the things that have occurred, especially when it comes to the violence, is in the holy text of the Quran. So I think when we talk about any group, whether we talk about Islamist extremists or white Christian nationalists, those minorities in those communities and those outliers shouldn't paint in the faith groups of Christianity or Islam, because there's a political ideology that's behind it that's beyond religion. Oftentimes you'll see people of the faith, like imams or pastors, say, well, these are not people of our faith. They're using faith as a weapon and as their rationale for different things. So making sure you actually understand that Islam is a faith of peace. Understanding that there's 2 billion people in the world that practice it. There's 1 million in the city. The city has hundreds of mosques. Muslims are your neighbor, and Islam is one of the Abrahamic religions, so there's a lot of ties between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. But you have to do a little bit of research on your own to see those connections and to see there is a through line between all these major religions, where it's often a call for peace, it's a value system for families, and it's oftentimes rooted in morality, so that society and people have rules and doctrines to make sure they're being peaceful neighbors, they're being mindful neighbors, and they're making sure to protect one another. And that's what I would want people to know about Islam. It is a religion of peace, and it's a religion that's just like yours. It's different, but it's just like yours.
I like that, essentially maybe the implementation or, the way that, different religions do things are different, but at the end of the day, the end goal really is, that peace and that harmony. So
Yes.
thank you for that once again. And now, looking ahead, how do you see the trajectory of the Muslim Community Network, and what do you hope to accomplish in your role as the executive director?
I think at MCN, I think we're on a trajectory of becoming a larger conduit organization that's able to support a lot of the small nonprofits around us. I think we've been able to do a really good job of really developing that advocacy and connection with government and with foundations. And I think going forward, it's how do we make sure to spread that knowledge base so that there's a more robust nonprofit system around us, because we can't do the work by ourselves. And we're not trying, our goal is not to be the largest nonprofit in the sector, it's to be the most connected nonprofit in the sector. And you can't do that by being a gatekeeper organization. It's making sure you're developing the proper connections, but making sure all the nonprofits around you also are able to get connected into the ecosystem. Because that's when we really have the support and safety net for our city, when we have some place for everyone in every corner of the city to go. And Muslim Community Network is not going to be able to be everywhere in our city. We hope to have a real true home base within my tenureship as executive director. I would like to have a community center where people can come and receive all the services from us, not just a small office space that we rent, but something that we actually own, where for the remainder of New York history, they can say, this is the Muslim Community Network Center, and you can come here for all of your needs, and they'll be able to service you. Because I think that's really important for a place for also non-Muslims to come and say, hey, I need a place besides a mosque or like a religious house of worship to learn more about Muslims. And we want to be that place to, on an interfaith line, to come to when you want to learn about Muslims, but for Muslim communities where we can also help you and support you and guide you to make sure that you have the best experience of being a New Yorker, not the experience of old for some Muslim New Yorkers in the 90s and early 2000s, but we're in a new era, and you should get everything that you deserve.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, not only for sharing that, but thank you so much for sitting down with us. I feel like we had such a great conversation in such a short amount of time, so thank you once again.
No, thank you for taking your time, Brittany, and thank you, Bronxnet.
And thanks everyone for watching. Remember, you can always watch this program anytime, anywhere on Bronxnet.org and YouTube. While you're there, be sure to follow Bronxnet on social media to find out who we'll sit down with next from Bronxnet's Media and Technology Studios in the South Bronx. I'm Brittany Skyler, and I'll talk to you soon.